Patrick, thank you so much for joining me on this podcast.
Yeah, man, it's an honor to be here. Thanks for having me.
Right off the bat, I want to just like maybe give a space for you to introduce yourself for people who are, really first tuning in and who are unfamiliar with you and your work. Besides, of course, the Spirit Mysteries members, because you've recently joined on as our esoteric counselor. What would you say? Like, how would you describe like your story and your work and what it is that you do?
Well, I think esoteric counseling is very much appropriate for what I do as far as the service I provide. But I would say, as my story and how I got to this point, or what oriented me in the direction of my gifts and how I'm sharing is really there was a certain point in my life when I came to a very, very clear promise that I made to myself and to the world, and it was just as simple as to be the best person I possibly can and to help as much as I possibly can. And I was at a very difficult point in my life when I made that commitment, but there was something magical that happened when I made that commitment. I truly made it from my heart that started creating opportunities for me and openings that just intuitively and synchronistically guided me on my path. And how I've kind of gotten to the point where I am now is, when I first made that step, I ended up synchronistically getting involved with a magazine, and I was a creative director at a Vision magazine, which was you'd say kind of like a new age publication based out of San Diego. And that's when I started getting my feet wet. I'd already been previously doing a lot of like esoteric knowledge study and, mind state and certain cleansing and different kinds of work on, evolving my consciousness. But that was a point where it really, really started opening up to me. And at a certain point, I decided that I really wanted to follow what was absolutely directly in my heart. And so at that point, it was in my heart to let go of the magazine and then actually just travel the country. And so I went out traveling the country, and I ended up landing in Sedona, Arizona, unintentionally. And the place just, drank me in. And from that point, it was finding the specific, in other words, where could I put my heart where it does the most? And so when I was asking myself that question and really tuning into that, I've always had a knack for being able to understand people, for feel people. I'm a Pisces moon, so I'm very aware of energetics in the moment. I can really feel people's emotions, and I have the ability to explain things relatively well. So I'm able to break down certain concepts that sometimes on some level but can't quite bring into words. Or if people are having trouble kind of understanding something going on with them, I can sometimes bring contextual analysis to their situation, so it makes more sense for them. And I've kind of been that person that people reach out to when they need some insight. And so naturally that just progressed forward into me working with people one-on-one. I started with my ex-girlfriend hosting retreats around the world where we would have people come from all over the world, and we'd either swim with dolphins or whales, or we would work on activating our passions in life, and so uncovering what our passions are and how to actualize them in the world. And I started a YouTube channel and putting myself out there with just as much kind of inspiring information that I could help people with. So I would share my story, share different insights that I have. And that really started to become like one of the main ways that I share. Another thing that I do is I'm a musician. I'm a hip hop poet, so I've put a good number of songs out there that that have been quite powerful and helpful for people. And essentially that process for me is just oftentimes sharing like what my own affirmations are. So it's like making a song of affirmations or a song of uplifting content or something that brings through a very pertinent concept that's relevant to these times, and bring that across in a musical way so that I can kind of merge that emotional experience of the music with the intellect of these different conceptual things that I'm bringing across. And so music and coaching or counseling are like kind of the 1-2 punch. And I'm also really I've been writing courses also, so to really like ground in the information that I'm trying to bring across. But a lot of it has to do with like the subjective experience. Like, how do we track and become aware of our subjective experience? What's going on in our mind? What's going on with our emotions? What's going on with our bodily sensations? And how do we kind of keep track of all of these things and then learn how to in a sense, modulate them intentionally, as opposed to kind of just being caught in the currents of our everyday surroundings. So kind of verbose expression, but that kind of contains a lot of what I do and in a sense where I came from with it.
Wow, there is a lot there. You're kind of a jack of all trades, aren't you?
To a certain degree, I say there's definitely holes in my knowledge for sure, but I do span across quite a few different categories for sure, as you do too.
I guess that's fair. Yeah. That's cool, man. There's a few things that I want to ask you about just from that story. One of the ones that actually stood out to me was astrology, because you mentioned Pisces moon and kind of how that related with your ability of expression. And I kind of just wanted to maybe just ask you what your experience is with astrology and your take on it, because obviously you start talking about astrology and you'll either get people very interested or people rolling their eyes. I mean, do you have anything to just add about that?
Absolutely. Yeah. One of the best ways I've found to describe or to speak to, say, a skeptic in regards to astrology is that I would say astrology is, in a very simple sense, it is a science for understanding the effect that celestial bodies have on the consciousness and on the planet. And so for somebody that may feel like, okay, well, yeah, but what does Mars have to do with my life on a regular everyday basis? You say, well, some of the celestial bodies that's very apparent that has an effect on human consciousness is the sun and the moon. And without the sun, we wouldn't have anything growing on the planet. Without the moon, we wouldn't have tides and all sorts of different things. And you could even go into some of the studies that have been done about crime rates and pregnancies and different things like this that have to do with moon cycles. And so when we look at that, it's very clear that the celestial bodies are having an effect on our consciousness. Now, some of them may be more subtle than the sun or the moon, but when you get into the study of it, you actually become a study of or a student of astrology, you start to realize that actually a lot of the archetypal, essentially you could say even all, the archetypal experiences that we experience are very deeply connected with our local universe here, our local star system, and all of the different planets and all of the different energies involved in that. And so it's a great way of being able to kind of understand yourself in a sense as kind of like a micro-macrocosm, and see that as things are happening externally, they're also happening internally, and it's a great way to track what's going on emotionally by tracking things that are going on externally and in finding reflections in your environment.
I think that was really well said. Yeah, even just I often like to relate it with, at least my experiences, my perspective has kind of become very similar, and it's very logical the way that you described it. But it's the moon pushes and pulls our tides, the water in our bodies, and there's a measurable effect. So why is it so outlandish to think that the other planets may not also have something of a similar relationship? So I think you put it into really good words. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's just a different dimension of connection too. So it's certain planets will have a pull on a certain dimension of emotions, a certain spectrum of emotions, right? So it's we could say the moon pulls the tides, and that's obvious. But another planet may not be so obvious because it's maybe not physically measurable in the same way that tides are measurable. But that doesn't mean that. We all know that we have experience of emotions, right? And we all know that we feel our emotions being pulled for sometimes obscure reasons. So it starts bringing some, some of the background into the foreground, so we can make these connections. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and even, gosh, you reminded me of something that's fairly significant here too. It's in science today, there's this huge divide between, we don't understand how the quantum world relates with the standard model world, or the relative world, or the world that we know and exist in, right? The macrocosmic world of large bodies of mass and stuff like that. And so there's this divide, there's this break in the chain of we don't see how the quantum becomes the relative, becomes this world that we live in. But then on top of that, we also don't understand gravity. Like, we don't have a measurable way to actually identify like gravitrons, if those are like the, you know, the gravity particles, if they exist at all, sort of thing, right? Like, there's really this like big like just lack of awareness scientifically about like how things work. And so I think it's very funny that on some level, like, you know, there's a lot of like skepticism about, you know, it's like, well, that's hogwash that the planets, you know, that the planets Mars could have any effect on us, you know, gravitationally or whatever. It's like, we don't even know what gravity is. How can we say that? You know?
Yeah. Absolutely. You know, it's so true. You know, and actually, you know, what's really inspiring is I've been working with a friend out in South France, and he's a physicist who actually does understand how gravity works. And so I'm just going to say his name, Dan Winter, and you can go check out his work at fractalfield.com. And I think you would actually really enjoy his work because you have such a great mind for the scientific aspect of things, and it's very and for like understanding systems and like big picture systems. And he really lays it out, and its connection to charge field compression and essentially love, and in how gravity works as essentially like the toroidal field of every plasma, everything that has a plasma body in the universe. So that whether that's a tree or a human. So it's really fascinating work. But yeah, it's like that kind of stuff. It's like, you know, when you incorporate that into the story, then all this world of all these possibilities open up, and you're like, wow, this world is way more magical than I ever conceived. And the interesting thing is that people like you and me, or probably a lot of people watching this podcast, is that we've probably had a certain level of experiences in our life, tuned us into the magic that this world, like how magical this world is, right? And so I know for myself, I'll say that, you know, a lot of this stuff that people may consider woo-woo or kind of like outside the box or just ungrounded or whatnot, it's like the reason I was able to, say, digest it and integrate it and not be so much of a skeptic surrounding it was because I had pieces in my life that completely fit with the information that's being presented. So I'm like, okay, this totally makes sense for me. But there are other people that don't necessarily feel on the same level. Not that they're any less developed, but that may just be their path, whatever it is. Maybe it's, you know, having greater insulation in their feeling sense might be part of like the gift that they're bringing forward. You know, and maybe like more of a hyper focus on, you know, the intellectual side of things without the feeling aspect has kept them less in tune with some of these you know, more esoteric experiences. So I've been able to kind of just dive into this stuff because of that. But this is where I think the beauty of bringing something like Dan Winter's work, or even like some of the newer scientific pioneers forward, is that it's creating a intellectual structure that's available for people that maybe haven't had the experiences to be able to buy into and like understand the possibilities that are available out there. And then from there, say, reduce some of the skepticism and give themselves permission to start exploring or intending to have some more of these experiences and break themselves through in different ways.
Definitely. Well, it's funny and amazing that you bring up Dan Winter, and it's so cool that you're a friend of his, because I'm at least somewhat familiar with his work. Like when I first learned about you know, like Drunvalo Melchizedek and started going down the Flower of Life rabbit holes, he referenced a couple of people a few times. One of which was Dan Winter. The other was Robert Schoch, and there was one other guy whose name is eluding me in this moment, but brilliant, like Egyptologist or something. But yeah, like I mean, it's so. There's a couple things that you reminded me of, just on that subject of, like, you know, Dan's work, finding and exploring like this new field. And we just yesterday posted a new episode of Spirit Science called Pyramid Power is Real. And in this video, we're talking about the existence of a new kind of field that seems to be interacting with the pyramid shape. And that it's from that, like the interaction between the shape and the field, that's causing these measurable electromagnetic effects, or energetic effects in our reality that like actually like facilitates like medicine gets more potent, women who were unable to have children could suddenly have children after being inside of a pyramid, and just all sorts of crazy things. Like even crops grow better. They fixed a hole in the ozone, with a pyramid placed underneath it. Just like wild things, and it seems as though, the more that we open to like actually discovering and finding and understanding what is this effect, what is this field, how does this work, it's like blazing a trail into a new paradigm for everybody. And on top of that, it's like, just the last thing that you've made me think of too is, like, for people, as you were describing, like, for people like you and me, and maybe a lot of people who have listened to this or who are listening to this podcast, they have, we and they and all of us, this maybe more spiritual community has a little bit more awareness about the magic of reality. But there's so many people who are stuck in that suffering. And it reminded me of, there's a movie called That Sugar Film. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's a documentary, kind of like, like Super Size Me, like that, like the guy eats McDonald's every day for 30 days or something. So this is like this Australian man is going to eat the standard American diet worth of sugar every single day, like average foods that you get in the store, but he's got to hit that, that average benchmark of how many teaspoons of sugar a day, which is some ridiculous amount. It's like 20, 30, or 40 teaspoons. I don't remember. It's this crazy amount. And so he does that for, like, I think it's 40 days. It might be 30 or 40 days. But yeah, he does that, and they explore along the way, like, the changes that happens to him in his body, as well as all of the, like, what happens, like, what's going on in the world when a lot of people will, consume sugar. And one of the biggest things was there's this medical doctor who was basically saying, listen, when you're on this, drug, for lack of a better word, your mind and your thinking become very narrow and become very focused and limited. And then your experience of reality is like looking through a pinhole. And then you try and explain to them, it's like that the world could be so much bigger, and they don't even have the ability to, like, cognitively understand that. They don't even have the awareness to consider or know. They don't even know what life could be like without it, because they're so dependent on that like dopamine kick that they get from eating the sugar. And so that's kind of like what you made me think of, is like for people who are so in the, just like the I guess traditional ways of thinking according to mainstream, the way that the world is according to the the mainstream mindset, is they don't, like, they can't even conceptualize. You start talking about law of attraction and love and stuff, and unless they're open to it, they're like, hogwash, that there's no way that's possible, because life is so shitty. Yeah.
That's an amazing point you brought up. It because it's like a package deal, right? It's like the food clogs your filters of perception up. When you're talking about the sugar, but I think in the greater spectrum of it, it's actually really, we start looking at all the elements, right? So it seems almost like all of the elements on, not from a pessimistic or conspiratorial perspective, maybe just from like an ignorant perspective, or the perspective that this was created by ignorance, is that it seems like all of the elements have been like weaponized, or at least have been polluted. And so the way I kind of look at it is that we have the Gaian, what I call the Gaian program, and that's like the natural program that is being rolled out by Gaia. And so you could think of, if we're gonna use a loose metaphor of like technology, it's kind of like the Gaian code. It's like the code to the organic matrix. And then on the other side, there's like a synthetic matrix, distortion code. And so when you talk about, like the overuse of like refined sugars, or just basically any of the pollutants that's in our food, that food is literally making up the earth element within our physical structures, right? In our physical bodies. And so if we're made of earth, air, water, and fire, right? And the earth, water, and air and fire are all polluted, then instead of getting that feedback loop with nature that we normally would get by ingesting healthy water and eating healthy food, where the source code of Gaia is in that, we're taking in foods code that clog our filters of perception, and then we can't perceive our reality clearly anymore because we're perceiving it through, this distortion lens. And so when you said that about the sugar just, distorting, they can only see through this pinhead of awareness because of basically the drug that's scrambling their filters of perception. I very much start thinking about like this whole kind of, it feels like an attack on the element at a certain level. And so it's like, so for me, it's been like a lot of my path has been, okay, well, I realize that the natural source code of Gaia is this code that is an evolutionary steward. It's here to help us evolve forward. Any real inventions or innovations of true worth came as a fractalized extension of nature, as opposed to something that was, against nature, or something that was using nature to exploit it. So it's like, how do we get back in tune with that source code? And so for me, it was like, well, what I need to start with is I need to start with trying to get as clean of source code, get back connected with the cleanest signal of source code as I possibly can, Gaia source code. So clean up my water, clean up my air, clean up my food. And then, fire is a bit of a more tricky one to explain, but essentially the way I see fire is around the fire is where we used to share our wisdom, right? This is where the ancestors the elders would tell us about our ancestry and tell us the story of what we were and what it meant to be human and what it meant to be part of this tribe and how to stay connected with the planet and stay in tune with the planet. But eventually that fire was replaced by radios, and eventually that radio was replaced by a television, which had the same sort of iridescent blinking light kind of phenomenon that draws your eyes, but it was telling you a different story. And it wasn't our empowered elders that were telling us the story anymore, right? So it was a different story. And this story that we've been told has disconnected us from what we truly are. So the fire is actually a really powerful element, but where the fire has been poisoned is through the false narratives that we've been sold through the media and all these other, blinking light kind of technologies that have taken the place of that. But essentially, when you look at that, then we have these 4 elements, right? And so how do we get back to our true self? How do we find that true Gaian impulse that's within us? Well, it's like we need to cleanse our palate, right? So, they say, there's like a lot of, they talk about like slave cultures that would actually develop a palate for slave food, develop a palate for slop, right? And I think that's what's happened to the culture in many different ways. It's like we've developed the taste for these unhealthy things. So we like to watch these movies where people are, suffering all the time, and we've like gotten into that, right? People like really, like McDonald's, like really chemical filled food. People enjoy that, they develop the taste for slop. But what I've found is that if you purify your fast from destructive media, you do a fast from chemical filled foods, and you get back to purity, it cleanses your palate, and then you are able to make the discernment between something that's healthy or something that's unhealthy, right? And classic example of this is I used to love the smell of colognes. And I remember as a kid being like, "Oh, that cologne smells so good," and this and that. But after a period of time where I stopped smelling colognes because I knew that they were all chemical filled, and then I got really into essential oils, then it was like then I would smell a cologne or like a deodorant, and it would instantly smell like the chemicals that were actually in it. I could smell the chemical toxins in it, and it was gross to me. But I had to clear my palate. I had to clear my, my olfactory palate, and this goes for all the categories, your emotional palate, whatever it is. You have to clear that palate to be clean, and then you can actually sense it. Because when we're filled with these toxins, and we've been bombarded since we were kids with all of these like low-level inputs, it's really hard to make the discernment between what's in alignment and what's out of alignment.
Dude, you touched on so many things there that I like, that just really, I want to talk about all of it. The first being just, I love that the relationship that you made to the fire, and the fire being then like bridging from, around the campfire and hearing the stories from the wise elders all the way to, the fire was replaced with the radio, and then that was replaced with the with like television and this and that kind of thing. And it's amazing because like, and I think this, you probably already know this, but like it's not just, just like a metaphorical representation, in the sense that when you study the elements, and again, I'm pretty sure that you're like on this bandwagon, is that the fire is like the representation of technology. It's that one element of like that first fire being like a tool that we use. And so like when you're like, we have a Patch Tarot Masters is this like very massive tarot class inside of Spirit Mysteries, and like esoteric astrology, spirituality kind of stuff. And like we go into each card for like an hour and a half, sometimes more. And when we did the Aeon, whose elemental representation is, or astral signature is, the element of fire itself, there was like this massive dialogue about fire and technology, and having that same effect, because even the way that like technology works, especially like computers and TV and stuff, is little electrical signals, and electricity is like a refined form of that fiery element. And that's why like even in like pop culture, in like Avatar: The Last Airbender, like the firebenders can shoot lightning. Well, not all of them, but it's like a refined skill that can be mastered by a select few, kind of thing, right? And so I mean, it's a beautiful representation. And I like that you also described like the sort of the artificial matrix versus the organic matrix, because it really is, it all kind of comes down to the story that is being told. And the story that is being told through the media and through, like entertainment and stuff like this, is one that is not, it's limited to, it's like that pinhole awareness. It's like limited to a root chakra story, or a sacral chakra, solar plexus chakra story sort of thing. And then sometimes the movies, in Hollywood and stuff, sometimes they'll like touch on the heart. They'll be like, like Pixar will have a ending the movie that'll like kind of make you cry and kind of make you feel a little nice, but like that's about the extent of it. And there's very little, especially when you go into like the modern media news sort of thing and advertising. It's almost all just like this very root level vibration. And then when that's what everyone keeps hearing and seeing and paying attention to, that's where their consciousness is. And so everyone, there's this just like limitation of consciousness, because there's very little conversation that is expanding the mind out to the great beyond, up all the way to the ground and beyond. And like also like just empowering people to live from a more, grounded, centered, healthy, balanced sense of being, like balance between this higher awareness and this root level existence, right? It's like the collective conversation is very limited. But I think that there's, at least from my vantage point, what it looks like to me is that there's this like, almost, I don't know how to describe it. In my mind, it like appears like a disc, but it's basically like, it's like the coin, it's like the two sides of the coin, where maybe up until recently, the masses were very, had a perspective about the way that the world was. And there was this sort of like, there's that conversation of like, the world is waking up, right? And that's sort of like the flipping of the coin, the other side. And now it seems like that coin is starting to like actually maybe even like spin or something, because there's, for example, we're in this pandemic right now. We're in this this big massive quarantine. Everyone's supposed to be wearing masks and staying away from each other. And from all the reports that I've seen, there's something like an incredibly high percentage. I forget specifically what the percentage is, but like an incredibly high percentage of people believe some form of conspiracy theory about this pandemic, right? And there's a lot of those different ones, but the biggest one being that this was not an accident, that this was planned, right? And so, of course, and it's this very interesting that like the mainstream media is like doing everything in its power to violently attack and suppress that idea, that story that this could be a planned thing. But then when you start really going down the rabbit hole and you see that like all of these media outlets are all owned by like the same companies and the same people, and it's like, and it's this controlled story, and you see those clips where it plays like 50 different news stories saying the exact same words and sentences at the same time. And it's like, okay, so if it's true that the pandemic, if like this story is, if it's just a conspiracy and there's no substance there, why is the media so violently against it? Where otherwise it would just be like they would just not even talk about it, right? Like, it seems as though there's something really going on here. And this is what I'm saying of like that whole like waking up is we've got these like two very potent perspectives now of what reality is and what the world is like and stuff like this. And maybe even who's in charge, right? Because like, you go down the rabbit hole, it gets weirder and weirder. Eventually you're getting to like reptiles and stuff, right? So, I mean, I really like now, I actually want to maybe ask you to share this again, or maybe go deeper into this. Like when we were in a spirit circle, it's kind of like a podcast, Inside Spirit Mysteries, like maybe a month ago. And we were talking about this, and I remember asking the group, about this, like, just all the conspiracies and stuff. And you had something really beautiful to share. Do you remember what it was?
Well, when I think it was with the train, the runaway train. Was it that thing? I've said that before, in context to this, which is
it might have been, and I would love to hear it again. I mean, and to sharing it for everybody.
Yeah, I think it was in the context of we were talking about narratives, right? So it was like, what are the different narratives, and what do we feel like the future holds for us, and it was about agendas, right? So, when you get in the conspiratorial through the conspiratorial lens, and you start going through down that rabbit hole online, it's like, geez, there's so many different narratives and conspiracies, and there's it's like. You literally, and I think there are people that do this, that you could spend all your time just focusing on that and still not get to the bottom of it. I mean, there's just so much there. And, one of the realizations that I had at a certain point was that, when people talk about a particular agenda that people are trying to roll out, like Agenda 21 or Project Bluebeam, or, so all these different kinds of agendas that they talk about in these conspiratorial circles, or conspiracy theory circles. I don't really like that term, but I use it because people kind of, I don't know, kind of know what I mean when I say that. But what I realized was that it's like, for every agenda that is attempting to be rolled out by a particular faction of, I don't know, the control matrix or whatever you want to say, there's some counter agenda that has that is in a sense like a resistance to that agenda. And when you start looking at just like life in general, is everybody kind of has their own agenda as individuals. Everybody's got their own agenda, and nobody's agenda goes perfectly. Happens is that agendas bump against other agendas and other agendas and other agendas, and eventually what unfolds as the reality is a kind of like summation of all of the different agendas as they come together and counteract each other, or influence each other or modulate each other, and it crystallizes into this collective experience that we experience as our reality. So I think the value in seeing it that way, and this also comes from me having connections with people that work that have worked in Black Ops military, and that are connected in with some of these kind of more secretive factions in military and the in world politics and whatnot. And the stories that I hear is that there's a lot of different people that are essentially, and the metaphor is essentially fighting over the wheel to a runaway train. And so, like, the world and our reality is kind of like, it's not in anyone's hands, and but there are a lot of people are fighting over the wheel. And so, because of that, I don't really collapse on any particular, theory or conspiratorial agenda as being like the way it's happening. But because that seems like how a lot of people relate to it. They'll say like, okay, this is the agenda. They're trying to roll out Agenda 21. They're trying to roll out this thing, and this is, how it's going to happen. And they start anticipating it that way. And I don't think it's necessarily, a waste of time to tune into those things, but I think it's important to consider that, well, there's a lot of different people moving from different directions and different angles, and what's going to happen is probably something completely unpredictable. That is, like I said, it's a result of all of these different agendas kind of clashing and then creating, its own unique shaped wave.
Man, I love the analogy of the runaway train. That's so good. I mean, it actually brings some, at least peace. I mean, I think maybe it's just for me, I don't know, like this idea that, because when you go down the conspiracy theory rabbit hole, it can become very frightening because of the nature of some of those conversations, right? It can become very like, oh dear God, there's this giant plan to like herd and corral all of humanity into, like tiny boxes and, keep us so controlled and microchipped and kill off 90% of the population. And so like that's like frightening levels of conspiracy. And like certainly at some level there might be an agenda like that, but to have that sort of like, and there's also so many people and organizations and organisms and just like groups of people going in different directions that collectively they're it's like there's hope for us, and we shouldn't just like throw in the towel and be like, well, we're screwed. But to actually just to have a little bit of faith and like move in the direction of like being about something that is meaningful to you and something that will actually like potentially create some difference and change in the world in a healthy and positive direction is something that, I mean, we can all hold to. And it's a good feeling to, I think, to be able to like, be in that mind state instead of that mindset of fear. I mean, we even talked about this in our first coronavirus spirit science episode, which was like, well, sure there's a virus, but like the real virus is fear. Like, look at how afraid everybody is and how that affects the cortisol in your body, that affects the stress hormones, that affects the way that you become more susceptible to disease and to even to viruses. Like, your immune system drops when you're more afraid. So the best thing for everybody is to like be confidently in their power. But again, like we go to the the news and the media and stuff, and it's just like, be afraid, be afraid, be afraid, be afraid, be afraid. It's like everything that's like being like shouted at us from every direction, which is a really good reason why not to listen to the news.
Absolutely, right? Yeah, and it's like, and it's also it's not underestimating the power of optimism and the power of hope. Because hope can change your fate. Hope can really change. The optimism can absolutely change the story. It can change the trajectory of everything. And so I think it's extremely important that if we are, exploring in our own sovereignty, if we're exploring these different conspiracy rabbit holes, that unless we want to help create a negative timeline to manifest, then it's really important that we're very, very aware of the vibration that we're holding throughout the process, and we're also aware of the creative capacities that we have to reframe in a healthy way, in a grounded way, reframe whatever we're exploring in a way that actually empowers us. Because if we're not using whatever information that we're getting to empower us, then what's actually the point of taking the information in? Now, the way I see it is that we should never deny facts. But regardless of what the facts are that we're looking at, it's still, for us to make meaning or to make sense of it within our psyches or within our consciousness, it requires us to interpret it in some way. So if we don't have a mechanism for being able to creatively interpret the facts in a way that's empowering, then maybe we shouldn't be exploring these kinds of things so much. Things that are taking us out of our zone, and focus more on maybe developing the capacity to interpret things in an empowering way. And that's actually how I even define truth. Truth is that which empowers us, right? And there's a difference between truth and facts. Facts are kind of like neutral props. You could look at a log in the in the forest, and you could interpret that a million different ways. You could say that's a chair. I'm going to use it as a chair. You could say, oh, that is a garden for inoculating mushrooms, or you could say that's this really, really ugly stump with a bunch of mold on it that kind of grosses me out. Now, so there's a lot of, and you could go on. There's a million different ways you could interpret, the meaning to this log, what that log means to you. Now, you could say, well, yeah, it does have mold on it. And you could say that like it's a fact. Look, it has mold on it, and that's gross. I don't like what mold does to my system. And you could go off about how that's factual, but that perspective of it, even though there's facts involved, you're interpreting it in a way that's disempowering you. So how can you also interpret that same exact set of facts in a way that empowers you? And in doing that, I feel like you're getting closer to the truth of what you're seeing. In other words, you're able to see more of what is connected to God in this thing, because inherently truth and God is something that empowers you. And so when people get facts confused with the truth, they're skipping over the creative aspect or their own inner agency aspect of the equation, and maybe just thinking that the only interpretation of this is something that is disempowering, and I can confirm that by pointing out the facts in it. When in actuality, you can always rearrange the facts. No matter how dismal they may look, you can rearrange them in a way to empower you, if nothing less than just learning how to grow your love to observe something that's ugly from a more empowering space. Then, anything that's ugly then at that point becomes fuel for you to become more empowered. So I think this is like really, really key as we're navigating through this world right now, because the energies that we're putting into our environment, the essences and the frequencies that we're interpreting things with have a very, very powerful effect on how things manifest and how things move forward. So it's really important that we're able to look for and find the truth in things, the empowering aspects in things, being able to see the God in things, because in doing that, in a sense, we are empowering these things to step more into their God expression. And I think this is like really, really key for humanity right now in our process of being able to, kind of use our power to funnel this experience that we're experiencing to a timeline that we're all going to appreciate and be stoked about in the future.
Wow. I think you kind of answered this question that I had that actually came up last night. Like last night I went to dinner with a couple friends here in town, and we were all talking about the Plandemic documentary. Are you familiar with it? Some people have sent it to me. I haven't watched it yet, but yeah, I'm familiar with what you're talking about. Yeah. It's pretty wild. I mean, because it really breaks down a lot of evidence and support for the idea of like how this whole pandemic really was a staged or a planned event kind of thing, right? And of course, it's very interesting that all of the media is really like violently attacking, blocking, banning, banned on YouTube, banned on Facebook, banned on Google. Like you look it up on Google and all you find is like, this is like just the most dangerous documentary according to the media and stuff like that. So I'm like, oh, that's interesting that like, but anyway, the question was, the reason I brought this up is the question came up last night. We were having dinner and we're talking about it, and it's like, it really feels a little bit like damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of thing when it comes to like engaging in this material, because if you don't watch it, you're choosing to kind of live in ignorance in a way. Like you're purposefully, well, unless you've never heard of it. But if you just like decide, no, I've just automatically decided that it's nonsense and I'm not going to watch it, then you're choosing not to take in all sides of the story and all sides of the conversation and the information. But once you do take it in, and you start to look at the world through that lens a little bit, and just like even feeling it out, like seeing what is this like what does it feel like to live in that reality, and like how does it feel to look at those arguments and that conversation that's made, and like to engage with really like that level of control that's imposed on on the world and stuff like that. What do you do about it? Right? It's like you still have to, work a job or, get food and live and kind of be a part of the systems. And, how do you live a holistic life if like literally it seems as though like, I mean, you go out to go shopping and like, even if you're just getting groceries, you're probably funding, like these wealthy multi-billionaires in some ways, right? And this you're kind of fueling this false matrix just by existing. And it's sort of like, wow, like how do you go on after that? Like where's the balance line? And I feel like you kind of really just touched upon that in a beautiful way of like, I mean, maybe you can even get even more into it if there's anything that comes to you, but just the basis of still striving to live that, like a healthy life that is in alignment with your soul, seems like a pretty good place to start.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's really the only place to start, because if you're not connected to your, I mean, there's a million ways of saying it, to your true essence, if you're not grounded, if you're not tapped into your source, then whatever distortions that you act with, whatever disconnections you're acting with, even if your intention is to create positive change, it's going to contain those distortions within it. And so I think, before we can really be of service, we have to really check ourselves and make sure we're in alignment. So I think the first step absolutely is to get back in tune with your, I like to say, true nature. Right. And that's like the guy, back to the Gaian Program. It's like, get back in tune with the Gaian Program. And then from that space, act from a space of love, act from a space of compassion. And, a lot of what I see in the world today is on say the less than optimum spectrum, is people that are due to all the different things that are going on, and many of cases in which it's like absolutely justified. The anger is justified. The frustration is justified. But it seems as if the justification of the anger or the unrest or the upsetness, in their perception, that justification for feeling that way is also a justification action as an expression of that anger. And where I feel like there is a very important aspect to acknowledging the rage or the frustration that we have in the world for all these things that are going on, that it's our responsibility and that there is actually something we can consider as sacred rage, right? Where it's actually it's the appropriate response to be angry to some of the disgraceful things that are happening. That is an appropriate response. But how we express that response can be in a reckless way or in a responsible way. And so, how do we express our anger? How do we express our rage or unrest in a way that actually helps, right? Not just just like like I said, reckless expression of it. And part of being able to do that is being able to, in whatever way that you can, have some sort of methods for getting back to your center, getting back to that balance point, so that you can truly feel who you are and you can move from a place of love, right? Because if we're angry about something going on, that anger can turn into hate really quickly for the perpetrators. Whereas sacred anger would be acting out not in hate for the perpetrators, but in love of the sacred that you're protecting. And that's a completely different space to operate from. So I feel that that it's absolutely imperative that we come back into balance. And this is, I was saying everything about the Gaian Program and whatnot, because it's this balance space that we need to start to operate from in order to truly be of service. And if we're not actually operating from a grounded, integrated space, oftentimes we create more problem than we actually solve. And it doesn't matter how justified we are in our anger or how clearly we can point out that there's problems with the world. It's our responsibility to take that and then alchemize that into an intelligent and grounded and heart-centered approach to our own expression in our life. And so for me, as far as how I'm integrating all of everything that's going on, is there was a certain point when I realized that I could not look to the external world. And this is a concept that I'd already practiced, but became very, very pertinent at the time that all this started happening, was that I could not look to the external world in order to make a decision about how I felt about things, or how I felt just in the moment, or how to be. And, and that's probably like a very common modus operandi for humans. It's like, well, you look around at your reality, and based off how good things are doing is how good you feel, right? But what I realized is that I needed to self-source good feeling, because if I just responded reactionarily to all of the atrocities happening on the planet, or all the misfortunes that would happen just even, say in my life, or, anybody's life, if we respond that way to it, then then we're actually not in the driver's seat. We're in reactionary consciousness. And what changes things, what helps create a different world, is when someone from an internal conviction acts outwardly, as opposed to respond, or a reactionary act that's coming from the interpretation of what's happening externally. So it's like, you could kind of say, if we're reacting to negative things in the outside, then we're going to put more negative out. So what we have to do is kind of like be like a cleanup machine. We need to come into our space, get into our vibe, and then from that space, bring that forward into everything. So we got to bring the good vibe into the negative things that we're experiencing on the outside, as opposed to letting those negative things set the tone for our vibration and then perpetuate that same negative vibration, right? And so this is a major kind of orientation that I have integrated into my perception with things, and that is also associated with not getting necessarily too caught up in trying to change things on like a crazy global scale, from the perspective of needing to get a huge following or get a huge voice, or like dive directly into the political sphere and affect people directly in the political sphere. For the people that have the capacity to affect things on those levels, that's their work to do, right? What I feel like a lot of the average person's work to do is, and obviously follow where your heart is going. But is like, and I'll even just speak for myself. It's like, can I create the most beautiful relationships with the top 30 people that I spend time around in my life? Can I just really heal those relationships around me? Can I really look at the world through a sacred lens of divinity as I walk around on a daily basis, and have extreme gratitude for all of the abundance that I experience, and for the trees and for the air that I experience on a regular basis? Can I get into that sacred space and live from that sacred space on a daily basis? Because all the people in my network will be greatly affected positively by that. And each one of the people that are positively affected in my network have their own networks, and those people will be tremendously positively affected by that. And so instead of kind of getting in this compartmentalized perspective of, trying to create social change or get so wrapped up in all these external kind of things, and not that these are necessarily bad, but instead of putting all of your attention into those things and then, say, neglecting the relationships that are right next to you. There's like, so I feel like there's so many people out there that are, petitioning about all this, stuff, but then they go home and they may have like a terrible relationship with their mother and their brother. And it's like, okay, so, but can we fix our like everyday reality? Can we heal our everyday reality? And then from that space, which is part of this integration I'm talking about, we're in an integrated space, living an integrated life, then we might actually have the capacity to affect things in a more, I don't even know what word to use, like to start like aiming our attempts to be more on like a grand external scale. Because again, if we have unhealthy relationships and all sorts of stuff bound up in our everyday life, then that's going to translate into the kind of social change that we're trying to project or create in the external world. So heal ourselves first. I think this is really, really key.
Oh man, you are speaking truth. That is, and it's love, and it's authenticity, and it's beautiful. I really appreciate everything that you just described. And I think that's really important for so many people to hear as well, because and I feel a little bit responsible too, because with spirit science there is often this energy of like, hey, we can change the world, and that is really like, there is like a bit of that vibe in spirit science. And even I'm also coming to this sort of humbler space of like, whoever's listening is, or watching these videos are like, it's exactly right. It doesn't have to be tens of millions and billions of watchers and viewers or whatever. It's like, No, it's exactly the right amount. The people who need to see it are seeing it, you know. But like for the average person who, you know, they work a job and they have their friendships and everything like that, it's like striving for that, like having really healthy relationships in every dynamic is one of the best things that we can do. And you kind of made me think too, like maybe even striving to embody whatever the archetype of the season is for that person. Like, I mean, I've found, you know, here's a little bit of a, you know, a little anecdote that is relative to me in my life, is like, you know, there's a lot of archetypes in shows, like Airbender, as we mentioned, is one of them. A lot of animes and a lot of, you know, shows that have these like teenagers that save the world, you know, and that's like a very common thing. So, you know, what happens when you turn 20 and you turn 30 and then you're getting older and older, and you're not a kid anymore. It's like, well, you can't save the world. But then this thing that I came to is like, well, it's okay maybe that I'm not a teenager anymore, because like I'm moving in the direction of like I could be like Gandalf, you know, like being like I can move into that other, you know, another archetype of becoming, you know, the wise wizard who really just guides the younger generation to help to do the work that they're here to do, sort of thing, right? Or whatever role it is, like, because there's so many different archetypes and so many different roles and characters that we can learn from and kind of strive to fit. So whoever it is, like, and for anyone listening, you know, if you're feeling lost, I feel like one of the best pieces of advice that at least I can give in this moment about this is like, if there's, you know, if there's a character that you really feel drawn to, you know, try, you know, like, see how it feels to like sort of take that on inside a little bit. And that also relates with, you know, Patrick, you said, you were talking about how, like, you know, you there's this buildup of energy inside, this like anger or whatever this feeling is, and there's this like reckless expression of it, this violent expression that can happen. And you made me think of just like, you know, that hermetic phrase of as above, so below, and as within, so without. And I've often described the human body of consciousness in the past of saying like that you are not like you being like everybody, whoever this is directed at, right? It's like we are not that which is just inside of us or that which is outside of us, but we are the space in between. So it's like we are the awareness of energy that flows inside and outside of our body of consciousness, and what we choose to do with it, how, like, what energy we let in and what energy we let out. And there's something I think to be said about like when energy comes in that triggers you and builds up this anger within you, right? It's like it's very easy to just like let that fly out in the other direction and you know, be outwardly find its expression. But if we can have the cognitive awareness to stop and have that inside of us, and then become like a transmutational vessel, like move the energy, allow the energy to move and transmute and like process through that toroidal field of our heart, and it can find a much healthier and more harmonious expression, because we ourselves become like the generator of love, if we choose to.
It's like then we're the alchemists, right? And then in whatever negative energy stream is being sprayed all over by other people that are, you know, just that are not being alchemists themselves, it stops at us. Whatever energy comes through, you know, whatever the negative energy comes through us or comes to us, stops at us. And then we alchemize that and put positive energy forward. So in the sense, we're like vacuum cleaners, vacuuming up the negative energy and then, you know, putting out positive energy. Absolutely. Now, you know, and another thing that I think is really important, I just want to bring into context as far as how powerful we actually are as individuals, just working on balancing the energies and the relationships in our lives alone, is actually, and I'm going to paraphrase, it was something that I heard, whether you like him or not, Jordan Peterson say. It's very mathematical, so it's really simple. He said, everyone will know and affect 1,000 people in their life, and each one of those people will know and affect 1,000 people also, which means that you're one person away from 1,000,000 people, and you're 2 people away from 1 billion people and 3 people away from the world. Your network is really powerful, and the energy that you put out does ripple out to everyone in the whole world. And when you actually see it from that perspective, you realize how powerful it is. So when you're walking by people during the day, that smile does make a difference. You know, that making that phone call to your parent that you haven't talked to because you had a falling out, that does make a difference, because that echoes to you know, on through them, to everyone in their life, to everyone in those lives, people's lives, and on to the whole world. So I think that's important to remember.
Oh man, I'm so happy you said that, because literally it was like maybe 2 weeks ago I went through this whole, I had a little like personal ceremony of my own, and I came out of it feeling so light and wanting to just like be with the people of the world, just with everybody, just being able to sit in conversation and sit in communion, you know, sacred communion with everybody that I saw. And there was this big dichotomy inside of me of being like, but I have things to do. Like I'm walking to the store. I'm not going to sit down in the grocery store with everybody who's there, and like, because I have to get home. There's videos and projects and all these. You know, my schedule's very busy. I got podcasts and stuff. So there was this conundrum inside of me. I'm like, how do I do both? You know, and you've really. I think you've actually just really helped me answer that question of, you know, even just being present for that smile, or like, you know, because when the conversation, I think there's probably a natural dynamic of like, not everybody you need to have a conversation with in every moment, but the ones that you do have to have, you know, or that are natural to have, they will happen naturally, right? If you're open to it, and then it'll happen at the perfect time and take the perfect length. But otherwise, just like being, if you can tap into that light and just like be a light when you're walking around, you know, your energy will still affect others without, you know, there even needing to be more than a passing glance and a smile.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact,
so thank you.
Definitely. Yeah. Well, thank you for, you know, just being here and inviting me on, and everything that you bring forward. You know, another thing I wanted to mention in regards to, partially how you responded to what I was saying in your own self-reflection as far as like reaching large groups of people, is that, you know, this doesn't at all, what I'm saying doesn't at all contradict the power that is available in reaching large audiences and affecting large groups of people, in like a one-directional way. In other words, where like one person can like affect a large group of people, or a small group of people can affect a large group of people. I think this is a this and that kind of thing, and certain people find themselves in very, very powerful positions in which I feel like the nature of their evolutionary process has put them in that position, because there's a particular I don't want to say the word obligation, because I don't want to make it seem as if it's like like a requirement, but it's like an opportunity for them to take greater responsibility and affect change at a larger number. So I mean, like, I think that what you're doing and what we're doing, right, at Spirit Science and Spirit Mysteries is absolutely incredible. And to be able to reach this larger group of people is so powerful also. But I feel like in order to maintain the integrity of everything that we do, especially like on a large level like this, it's imperative that we're also working on our own individual levels, refining our relationships in our everyday life too. So it's really like a this and that thing.
Yeah, you know, I had some a friend of mine complimenting me the other day for that, and he was just like, how do you you do so much. How do you do it all? And I just responded, I'm like, it is a big responsibility. Like, in terms of like, you know, like my quote unquote free time is often spent learning and focused on specific things that will move my whole life and a body of consciousness, my spiritual awareness, everything forward, because then that directly goes into the work that I'm doing. But there is that, like, you know, again, it's another one of those, like, you know, whether you like him or not sort of things. I think this is a profound wisdom from Elon Musk. I feel like I have a lot of respect for Elon Musk, just because even if there is, you know, I mean, he said he's an alien before, and there's a lot of controversy around him, but I really appreciate the direction that he's going, of like just straight up Tesla, he's like, we need to be moving to a more self-sustaining, like in reality with energy, and so we're gonna do it. And they're like, like everyone's like, no, you can't make an electric car, and he's like, watch us. I appreciate that a lot. But what he said, there was like a group thing at one point, like it was like a school tour or college tour or something of like his like offices or something. I don't know if it was SpaceX or if it was Tesla or whatever, but they were asking him questions. How do you be an entrepreneur? How do you do what you're doing? And he's like, it's really hard, and I kind of don't recommend it. And he was really speaking to like the level of responsibility and trial and error, and like most people who start a business of some kind will fail, and then they'll give up because it was very difficult, because it really requires, and I can just say, like, speaking from my experiences, like, I'm very blessed and lucky that like I felt like in a way like Spirit was preparing me for this for a long time, because I fell in love, like I just completely fell in love with animation and storytelling and making videos as early as the age of 12. Like I was animating stick figure fights inside of the dictionaries in grade 6, and then the next year I went into junior high and I learned about Macromedia Flash, and I started making like digital cartoons, and I never stopped. Like it was a huge passion. And so by the time I had the spiritual awakening at 19, I was already like a very, I would say, as far as like a self-taught animator, I would say I was not bad at what I did. Like I definitely didn't have like the prowess of like a full-on Disney animator sort of thing, but I could work my way around the software and I could make videos pretty fine. And so like it felt like this natural progression. But from there, like with the success of Spirit Science and all the views and everything like that, it really, like, that energy propelled me into having to learn a lot of things that I don't think I ever would have naturally chosen to do. Things like eventually running a business and doing accounting or understanding how the different business systems work and stuff like that. Those are not things that are like super exciting to me, but I had to learn them in order to actually like see this vision grow, which of course naturally grew as a result of making Spirit Science. Like spirit centers and mystery schools and all these things are all like dreams of mine, things that I'm really passionate and excited about. And it's that motion, it's like the whole thing, like that, the energy, it's like in order for that to really come to fruition through Spirit Science and Spirit Studios and everything, like I have to be in alignment with the state of being that's required in order to fulfill that vision. So it really does take a lot of responsibility, and like using a schedule and showing up on time and like caring, like genuinely caring about the results of every aspect of your work, and not just like doing things haphazardly and taking things for granted. Like you really, and even like the people that you work with, right? I think this is a big thing that, well, I'm told that like from various team members in Spirit Studios, they're like, I've never worked for a company that like genuinely was such like a supportive environment, because I think that this is very missing in the world. But it's like I really want the best for everybody who works with and for me in Spirit Studios, and I think that leads to a very healthy environment and really great output and really great content and stuff like that we produce as a result of like everyone being really engaged together. So, but like all of that, it all comes from doing that self-work, right? Like being able to show up for yourself. So for anybody who's, starting their own adventure, it's like, know that this is a very big, beautiful journey with amazing, results, but you have to be willing to see it through, even when failure comes knocking at the door, because the failure is like it's an outcome that's almost bound to happen in any entrepreneurial or kind of life adventure. But it's really just like it's there as a test to see if you will persist through the struggles and have faith in the greater picture and mission and vision that you're trying to
Absolutely.
uphold.
Yeah, I think and I love how you spoke to that. It was really beautiful, and I really appreciate and respect your path and everything that you've done thus far, and how you've been able to stay so in integrity on this path, bringing these fruits to humanity. And with this makes me think of is in some of the independent Rosicrucian studies that I've done is they talk about a specific kind of being, which is like a false light being. And in making discernments between whether it's a false light being that is kind of working with you versus whether it's in central pillar, as they would call it, like being or Christic being, and that when you are in a sense receiving like a spiritual mission, like a divine mission to pursue, that if you that there's when it's legitimate, that there's a weight that comes with it too. It's not just this like, oh, I've been picked, or this is so exciting, and like I'm this really special person that's here to do this really special thing, where it's like all this upside of just, an inflation of your spiritual ego. That actually when these missions come to you and we realize maybe more precisely what it is that we're here to do, that we feel honored. Of course, it's a deep honor, but there's this weight to it because you realize like, what you're going to have to carry, what you'll have to sacrifice, and the importance of you staying in integrity and actually keeping yourself tempered to actually fulfill it in a healthy successful way. And so I just want to say that because it's I think that like a lot of people that may look at someone like yourself and from one angle be like, oh, well, like, he's got it all and he's, just running stuff and doing all this like, crazy spiritual stuff, or he's been selected by the beings to, or the medicine or whatever to like do these things. It's not just like it's not just like a lucky thing. It's like, this is something that, it's sobering. And it's very grounding, and it's like, okay, I got to be serious about this, and it's from my heart and it's love, but it's, it has a weight that comes with it, and that's actually a good discernment also for you knowing if there may be some sort of ethereal influence that might be trying to get you to spin your wheels a little bit, or like inflate your spiritual ego, which is actually very, very common for people in the beginning stages of their spiritual development. When they start coming online, beings will come and inflate their ego and tell them they're these grand masters that have all these powers and they're supposed to do all this stuff. But you can kind of tell the difference between a being that's kind of blowing smoke versus like some sort of communication as to like a true mission, because true missions, like I said, they come with a certain level of weight and like kind of like a slap in the face. Okay, like I got to be serious about this.
Man, I'm so happy you said that. That is exactly what happened to me, 100%. I don't know if you could say it was like coming through in entities or people or both.
Yeah, however it comes through.
But
yeah.
It was literally like I made spirit science, and again, just it's like I didn't have that Gandalf in my life to support me and help me stay grounded or rooted. Like it was me, and like I mean, me and 1,000 voices or 10,000 voices from around the internet, like sending me stuff, and most of my friends, if not all of my close personal friends, all kind of very distanced themselves from me when I made spirit science. So I felt it was like a shift. I felt very isolated, but also like had more success than I'd ever had before, because there were so many voices. But like I can't tell you how many emails, comments, and messages that I received from every social media channel and in my emails that were like, you're the Messiah here to do, all of this stuff, and
right.
and it kind of went to my head a little bit at first, because it's like, what do you do? I mean, when so many people are telling you that, and I mean, the result of that was just I kind of just got a little bit. I guess I just took for granted all of the love and attention and affection that I was receiving, because I was like, well, I must have there's something really special about me, right? And there was a crash that came from that. I was very manipulated into a specific relationship and circumstance through that sort of ego that had been building up in me, and the result of it was like I almost lost spirit science entirely, and it was a really difficult time. I've been coming out of it the last few years of like rebuilding and recreating things with a lot more understanding and humility and awareness, after having gone through those waves. But it was it's a very real thing, and like I still see it today. I mean, I feel like I'm a lot more balanced and centered now, and but I still see it today in these comments on YouTube of like every so often there's like, hey, guess what? I'm the next Jesus. Come and get magic from me. You know, like these comments of people, and I'm like, oh, I love you so much. You know, and even still, I'm receiving within me like deeper lessons of humility and like understanding about, you know, there's been this big push that I've had of trying to understand ascension, you know, because this has been like a conversation that first I was introduced to, you know, from Drumvelo's books, and of course like the Bible and everything, and but Drumvelo really described like what a dimensional shift could look like, and like people basically, you know, becoming like gaining some sort of supernormal abilities. And I've had these ayahuasca ceremonies where I've seen both like people in mass as well as like myself learning how to like levitate and fly. And of course there's all these stories of like Buddhist masters or, you know, Hindu masters that have like gone through the depths of learning their spiritual mastery and like actually like gaining these kinds of abilities. And so I became very interested in this and have been talking about it and like exploring it. And I think that on some level that these kinds of things are possible. But at the same time, I very recently had this, you know, this sort of Christ, it was a ceremony I did. I had this sort of like Christ consciousness reconnection sort of thing. And I was like, well, straight up, how could I help people if I'm flying through the sky, if nobody else can fly? I mean, the best place for me is on the ground with everybody. And it was just like this wonderful, like peaceful, like, yeah, you don't need to fly. I mean, if it happens and you like gain that ability or some way, like beautiful, like use it to the best of your ability, but you know, be honored and humble in being here with everybody right now. And I was like, wow, that's really special. So I'm grateful, really. And there's so many ways that we can learn and practice humility, and I think that's pretty much one of the greatest ways to transcend is acknowledging that there's so much beyond us that we don't know and understand.
Absolutely. Yeah, you know, and I feel like a lot of these siddhas or siddhis that people develop, you know, so I've heard through my studies and to a certain degree with some personal experience. I'm not to try to make the impression that I have some crazy powers or anything, but that it's more of like a side effect of growing your love than it is or at least that's like I would say like more of the appropriate path of moving towards it. You see a lot of people that, you know, might get really fascinated in the idea of like levitating like that, and then just put all this like effort into focusing how to levitate. But where I hear a lot of like masters where they first get their siddhas, where they first come online, is in, you know, some sort of moment of distress when when in order to be of service to some other person, they needed to last second like pull something through that they didn't know that they had. And that's actually how oftentimes they come online. I'm thinking of one story in particular of a guy that worked with a master named Max Christensen, one of his students. He learned how to teleport, but he was able to teleport in Japan because during the tsunami there was a woman that was pregnant, and she was giving birth, and she, you know, in the midst of all the chaos from the tsunami, and he didn't, you know, he picked her up. He didn't know what to do with her, but he wanted to get her to the hospital. And in that moment, he somehow, you know, drew upon these deeper resources within him, and was able to teleport her to the hospital. And funny enough, he actually got caught on camera doing it. So now he's this like big celebrity in Japan. People go to like learn, you know, spiritual practices from him and all sorts of stuff. But that's, you know, just a story of how a lot of these like powers actually come online because you're in your heart trying to be of service in the right way, and it's through the growing of your love and through the development of your integrity that these things come online, as opposed to, you know, doing, you say, more of like a dark magician path of like just trying to develop these skills so that you can use them for your own benefits in whatever kind of selfish way that people might, you know, be trying to develop these things.
Yeah, well, this is a very interesting to me because that conversation actually came up. Well, first and foremost, I want to say I really appreciate that you framed that, like, you know, supernormal abilities come as a result of your love, and like expanding that. And I think that's especially potent, just considering like the whole toroidal field of the heart being so, like the main energy center of the whole body sort of thing. I think it's just like a beautiful relationship there. But then in regards to the Japan guy, this is very interesting because this came up once before on the podcast. But after the podcast, I went looking for those videos and I could not find anything on the internet about it. But it's very, very interesting. Do you know where we could find those videos?
I don't know where. That was, I could ask people that are in the community of Max's community though, if they can get the videos. It might be a censored video. You know how that happens. Maybe censored, but yeah, the guy's name is Khan, and I don't remember his last name, but his name's Khan, and he's associated with Max Christensen. And Max Christensen he's like a Tibetan Lama, Taoist priest, like a Apache and Navajo shaman. He's also a Mongolian shaman, so he's highly recognized by all these different spiritual orders, and he's got some good content out there. Not a whole lot. He does more like private retreat kind of things, but you can find him online if you look him up, and that would be a thread for anyone that's listening if you wanted to kind of follow deeper into that story. But yeah, I mean, I could ask some of the people in the community, and if I figure out that where the video is. Now, Max, if you go to one of his things, he'll show you all sorts of crazy pictures and video stuff that he has, which is really, really mind bending. I won't get into the details of that, but like as far as like some crazy interdimensional stuff, it's like he's got videos of that, and he'll show it to you if you do attend one of his retreats. So that's cool.
Cool, that's awesome. Oh man, Patrick, we've covered so many beautiful things here on this podcast today. I want to just say thank you so much for sharing everything that you have. This has been like just one of the most enlightening conversations that I've had in, well, I mean, all of our podcasts have been really good, but this one is really juicy all the same. So thank you.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much for setting the space and for calling me on. And, it's an honor to be working with you, and I'm excited to just see where everything goes. One thing I wanted to mention to you too is, if you do explore more of Dan's stuff, I mentioned to Dan last time I talked to him that I had been, that I'm now affiliated with the spirit mysteries and whatnot, and kind of explained some of what we were doing, and he's interested in connecting and seeing where there could be a collaboration point too. So I think that could be potentially really, really interesting as far as the like bringing some grounded physics, like new grounded physics aspects to the conversation.
Absolutely. Yes, I would love to meet Dan, get him on the podcast, and then maybe connect him with my writer for Spirit Science, and we can like do a whole series together. That would be so cool.
He'd totally be into that for sure.
Awesome. Thank you so much, man. This has been great.
Cool.
Yeah, so before we sign off, I know we're going to put links in the comments below and on this podcast, but for anybody listening who wants to go down, explore some of the the rabbit holes that you go through, where can people find you?
So you can find me on my YouTube channel, which is Patrick Haize Live, Live. So it's YouTube / Patrick Haize Live. There will be a link down there below. You can also find me at patrickhaize.com / sessions with Patrick or / mentorship with Patrick if you're interested in doing one-on-one work with me. And those are my two primary contact points, I would say, is my YouTube channel and my website. So my website, actually, I'll mention that too, is patrickhaize.com. You can go to my website there at patrickhaize.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much again, and thank you everybody for listening. This has been another fabulous episode of Spirit Science Live.
Beautiful. Yeah. Well, thanks so much, Jordan. It was an honor to be here, and we're going to keep bringing the love forward.